The sound of rolling luggage echoed across the glass walls of O'Hare International Airport, a crisp Chicago wind trailing behind Layla's silk scarf. She had always moved with purpose, her steps sharp but graceful, heels clicking against the polished tiles as if marking the rhythm of a farewell song. This wasn't just another business trip. This was an escape, a quiet retreat from a life that had somehow stopped feeling like her own. Layla Monroe, 34, a luxury event designer known for orchestrating the kind of weddings people posted about for years, had just canceled her engagement. The irony wasn't lost on her. She could design perfection for others, yet when it came to love, real, messy, uncertain love, she felt like a stranger in her own story. Her phone buzzed. A message from her mother. "You don't have to prove anything, baby. Come home if it's too much." But home didn't feel like safety anymore. Not Chicago, not even DC. She needed something else, something, or someone, that didn't remind her of broken promises and champagne toasts that meant nothing. She glanced at the departure board. Initially, she was heading to a luxury retreat in Lake Como to stage a celebrity wedding in which she no longer wanted to participate. But her eyes drifted downward to a different destination, Asheville, North Carolina. No high society, no press, just forests, mountains, and silence. Before she could second-guess herself, she walked to the counter. "I'd like to switch my flight," she said. "To Asheville?" the agent asked, raising a brow. Layla smiled faintly. "Exactly." Miles away, in a different corner of the city, Ethan Caldwell had just left his office in a restored brick building tucked between West Loop's rooftop restaurants and art studios. CEO of a discreet but wildly successful AI diagnostics startup, Ethan had long grown tired of being labeled the reluctant tech millionaire. There was nothing reluctant about it. He had built everything from scratch, but what he had become reluctant about was people. Since his younger brother's betrayal and the previous PR nightmare, Ethan had become more fortress than man, guarded, skeptical, precise. Relationships felt like transactions. Emotions were dangerous variables in his algorithmically optimized life. So he kept his world neat, controlled. But that night, something pulled at him. An email had landed in his inbox, one he almost deleted. On the verge of closing, a small wedding venue in Asheville offers private retreat packages. "For those seeking reconnection with something real," the tagline read. He didn't believe in fate, but he did believe in instinct, and he told him to go. The air in Asheville was different, warmer, wilder. Layla stepped off the plane and breathed in the scent of pine and possibility. No media, no expectations, just the weight of her thoughts and the quiet promise of stillness. She checked into a rustic inn on the edge of the Blue Ridge Mountains, its stone fireplace already lit for early spring evenings. She wasn't planning anything. For once, she wanted to be the guest, not the planner. But fate, or whatever force she no longer believed in, had other plans. That same evening, Ethan Caldwell checked into the room across the hall at the same inn. When their eyes met over mismatched mugs of coffee in the lodge's kitchen the next morning, something subtle shifted. Neither said much, just a nod, a polite smile. Strangers, yet not quite. There was something unsaid in the air between them. Recognition, perhaps, of two people trying to outrun something, only to crash quietly into each other. And though neither of them knew it yet, this slight detour would become the beginning of everything. The storm had passed, but the air inside the glass-walled conference room remained charged with unspoken tension. Rain still streaked the windows of the penthouse suite where Logan Bennett sat opposite Amara Collins, her hands clasped neatly in her lap, her gaze calm but unreadable. Between them lay the proposal, printed on thick linen paper, bound in sleek black leather. A marriage contract, legal, binding, cold. He watched her, quietly stunned by the stillness she carried. In the sharp lighting of the room, her expression betrayed nothing, but he could sense the flicker of calculation behind those thoughtful eyes. She had read every word. She had even corrected a clause. And now, she was waiting for him. "Do you find the terms acceptable?" he asked finally, his voice low, almost too careful. Amara met his eyes. "Acceptable isn't the word I'd use, Mr. Bennett." He resisted the urge to shift in his seat. "Then let's discuss." She picked up the contract and turned it into a marked section. Clause 7. The parties agree to maintain a public image of a devoted couple for no less than 24 months. I have no issue with appearances. But I won't tolerate being paraded. No red carpet hand-holding, no whispered leaks to tabloids. He didn't flinch, but he noted the steel in her voice. "Understood." She tapped another section. And Clause 11. The non-disclosure terms are extensive. That's fine, but I want a mirrored clause. Your discretion is required just as much as mine, especially concerning my past, especially concerning Nia. The mention of the child's name hung like incense, delicate, revealing, impossible to ignore. Logan's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "You're very protective of her. I'm her mother, and her father." Amara's posture didn't change. Irrelevant. The room fell into a brief silence, broken only by the distant hum of traffic far below. Logan exhaled quietly. "Fine. Mutual confidentiality," clause amended. She nodded, then stood slowly. "Then I suppose we have an agreement." He rose too, buttoning his jacket, and offered his hand, not as a gesture of warmth, but of business. But the pressure was deliberate. Her hand lingered in his, just a second longer than necessary. "You're not the only one protecting something, Mr. Bennett. Just remember that." And with that, she turned and walked toward the door, her silhouette a study in poise and power. The elevator closed behind her with a soft chime. Logan remained by the window, watching the last of the city's storm clouds fade into dusk. Something about her unsettled him, though he would never admit it. Not to her, not to himself. This wasn't the arrangement he had planned. He had expected someone practical, someone malleable. Instead, he had hired a woman who walked into his world on her terms and signed his contract like a treaty she had negotiated. There was no weakness in her, no trace of desperation. She didn't need him, and that was what made her dangerous. Back in her modest apartment across Harlem, Amara stood in front of the mirror, reading her reflection like a map. Nia was asleep in the next room, her tiny breath soft through the baby monitor. The contract was done. She had signed her name beside a man she barely knew, sold her time and image for security, and the future of the person who meant more to her than anything. But something inside her warned that this was not going to be clean, because Logan Bennett may have thought he was buying a solution. He didn't know that the woman he had just married had spent her entire life refusing to be solved. The city moved as if unaware of what had shifted in the quiet spaces of the Beaumont penthouse. Everything still gleamed with sterile perfection from the outside. The doorman's polished shoes, the glass elevator humming its mechanical lullaby, the skyline softening into twilight. But inside, the energy between Layla and Elliot had begun to rearrange itself, like furniture that had always been in the wrong place. They didn't speak much that morning. Elliot left early, barely saying goodbye, his jaw tight, his tie slightly askew, a rare breach in his immaculate appearance. Layla watched the door close behind him with a stillness that was not quite sadness or relief, just silence, like a thread pulled taut between two hearts, unsure if they should tie together or pull apart. She spent most of the day alone in the apartment. Though she'd come here only weeks ago as part of a contract, the space had already begun to feel too big, too silent. The furniture was modern and cold. The view was spectacular. And yet, it all felt borrowed. Her mother's call came in the afternoon. "How's the arrangement?" her mother asked, carefully avoiding the word marriage. "It's complicated," Layla replied, wrapping her cardigan tighter around her. "He's not who I thought he'd be." Her mother was silent for a beat. "Are you safe?" Layla nodded, even though her mother couldn't see her. "Yes, just unsure." Later that evening, as the light faded into a watercolor of purples and blues over the Chicago skyline, Elliot returned. He didn't look surprised to find her waiting in the lounge, barefoot, curled up with a book she hadn't read. There was a subtle tiredness in his eyes, something that had nothing to do with work. He poured himself a drink, then paused. "Would you like one?" Layla looked up. Sure. It was the first time he'd offered. They sat across from each other, glasses in hand, a silence stretching between them that was not awkward, but weighted with things unsaid. Elliot was the first to break it. "I wanted to apologize," he said quietly, "for the way I spoke to you last night. I wasn't fair." Layla blinked, caught off guard. She hadn't expected this version of him. Not the calculating CEO, but this man with tired eyes and something fragile in his voice. "You were honest," she said, "even if it wasn't kind." He chuckled, barely there. "I've spent so long making decisions based on strategy that I forget how to speak like a human being." She tilted her head. "Then speak to me like one now." Elliot looked at her for a long moment. "I didn't want a wife. Not really. My board thought it would soften my image. And there you were, sharp, poised, fearless in that room full of suits. And I thought, if I have to do this, at least it could be you." Layla's grip tightened around her glass. "That's quite the compliment," she said, her voice laced with irony. He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, glass forgotten. "I'm not good at this, Layla, but I'm trying." She studied him, not the billionaire or the strategist, but the man, seated across from her, slowly unraveling, thread by thread. "I didn't want a husband either," she admitted softly, "especially not one who treats love like a stock option." A pause, then a question she hadn't expected from him. "Have you ever been in love?" Layla looked out the window, toward the lights of the city blinking against the darkness. "Once," she whispered. It ended with silence, not fire. Elliot didn't press. He only nodded, as if he understood more than he let on. That night, they didn't sleep in the same room. But she didn't feel like a tenant in someone else's life for the first time since the ceremony. And he didn't return to an empty home for the first time in months. Somewhere in the stillness of midnight, with only the hum of the city below, Layla stood by the hallway and listened to the sound of Elliot's quiet breath through the closed door. Not longing, not desire, just presence. And presence, she realized, could be its beginning. The restaurant Ethan had chosen was tucked beneath a canopy of soft lantern lights in a quiet corner of downtown Savannah. It was the kind of place where whispers danced over candle flames and laughter dissolved into the air like perfume. Layla walked in, wrapped in a navy blue silk blouse and soft curls that framed her face, an expression of quiet resolve playing at her lips. She spotted him before he saw her. Ethan was seated at a table near the window, his blazer folded neatly over the back of his chair, white shirt rolled to his elbows, fingers toying absently with a glass of bourbon. Something about how he looked at nothing made her pause for a beat before approaching. When their eyes met, she saw the faint flicker of surprise, quickly smoothed over by that practiced composure he wore like armor. "You came," he said, rising to greet her. "You invited me," she replied softly, calm but firm. "I figured you don't waste your time on things you don't mean." A ghost of a smile traced his mouth. "I don't." They sat. The waitress came and went like a shadow, leaving behind menus that neither of them opened. There was a quiet tension coiled in the air between them. Not hostile, not uncomfortable, just layered, heavy with words that didn't fit neatly into small talk. Layla broke it first. "I used to come here during my residency. They served the best tomato bisque in town until they got a new chef and tried to reinvent it. Ruined it completely." Ethan's brow lifted. "So you're telling me this place peaked during your med school days? I'm telling you that not everything needs a facelift to be valuable." The line wasn't meant to sting, but landed between them like a challenge. Ethan leaned back, considering her. "You think I've changed?" he said after a moment. "I think you've buried the part of yourself that used to feel things instead of managing them." He didn't deny it. Instead, he glanced out the window. The sky had shifted from twilight blue to a dusky charcoal, the color that signaled something was about to begin. Or end. "You're different too," he murmured. "Less guarded, but sharper." Layla tilted her head slightly, studying him. "Maybe I've just gotten better at knowing which wounds are worth protecting." Their entrees arrived. Neither touched the food. Ethan rested his elbows on the table, fingers interlaced, gaze steady. "You didn't ask why I wanted to see you." "You didn't say," she replied evenly. "I got your message," he said, and for the first time, there was a hint of vulnerability in his voice. "The one you left with Miles." Her posture shifted ever so slightly, but her face remained unreadable. "I didn't think you'd listen," she said. "Back then, you didn't listen to much that didn't fit your plans." "That was a mistake." His voice was low, almost rough. So was walking away. Layla's eyes held his for a long moment. "Mistakes are inevitable. It's how we live with them that matters." Ethan exhaled, long and slow. "Do you live with yours?" She looked down at her untouched plate. "Every day." "But I don't carry it the way you do." The words hung between them, delicate, pointed, and impossibly human. For a moment, the air seemed to pulse with memory. The way he used to watch her sketch surgeries on napkins. The way she used to wait for him at the gate before he flew out to Tokyo or Berlin. The night they'd once argued for hours about whether loving someone meant always choosing them, or sometimes letting them go. He shifted in his seat, his voice barely above a whisper now. "Did you love me, Layla?" She blinked slowly, her lips parting just a fraction, as if the truth had to be coaxed out from the deepest place she'd kept it hidden. "I never stopped," she said. Ethan looked down at the table, something raw and unguarded flashing across his features. Too quickly to fully register, too honest to be denied. "But that doesn't mean I trust you," she added, gentler this time. He nodded, accepting its weight. "I didn't come here to earn it back in one dinner." "Good," she said, "because I'm not a woman who trades pain for promises anymore." He smiled for the first time that evening, not his curated boardroom smile, but something smaller and quieter, almost grateful. They sat in silence, the kind that didn't demand to be filled. Outside, the wind shifted, brushing the glass with the faintest sound, like the beginning of something just starting to stir again. Inside, two people who had once known each other deeply sat across from one another as strangers who might still remember how to begin. Layla's penthouse apartment was still bathed in the late afternoon sunlight, but her heart felt heavy and dark. The clock on the exposed brick wall ticked incessantly, emphasizing the silent passage of time. Layla sat by the oak kitchen table, her fingers absent-mindedly tracing the rim of a cup of tea. Everything inside her seemed to be breaking apart into scattered fragments. The thoughts of Ethan, the things he said, the things he didn't. She had always thought she was strong. Growing up in a working-class neighborhood in West Philly, no one taught her to rely on anyone but herself. But lately, she wondered if her strength was just a kind of armor, a shield starting to crack under Ethan's quiet but persistent gaze. He hadn't called and hadn't texted. After he held her that night, everything suddenly fell silent, and silence to Layla was not peace. The line between near and far was doubt, an unspoken refusal. A soft knock came at the door, as if the person outside wasn't sure if they should disturb her. Layla stood, her heart fluttering slightly. She wasn't expecting anyone. When the door opened, standing there was Isabel, an old colleague, once a close friend. "Can I come in?" Isabel asked, eyes hesitating. Her curly hair was tied back, and her beige trench coat carried some dust from the street. Layla nodded quietly, stepping aside. They hadn't spoken in over a year, since Isabel left the company to pursue a media job in New York, leaving Layla to carry a half-finished project alone. "Still making mint tea?" Isabel smiled softly, glancing toward the familiar kitchen. Layla silently poured another cup, placing it in front of her friend. "Still pretending I have time to rest," she replied half-jokingly. They sat silently for a moment, as if testing whether the cracks between past and present could be mended with a few small questions. "Did you fall for him?" Isabel asked directly, her gaze fixed deeply on Layla's eyes. No beating around the bush, no avoidance. Layla said nothing. She looked down at her hands, fingers intertwined, stiff. "Because the Layla I knew never let herself get pulled in," Isabel continued, her voice softer now. "And now, you look like someone waiting for something she doesn't want to admit." Layla let out a short, bitter laugh. "Is it that obvious?" Isabel didn't answer. She just sat there, with Layla, in the unnamed truth. Meanwhile, across the city, Ethan stood in front of an old piano in his mother's house in Lincoln Park. The evening light spilled through the large window, casting a soft golden hue on everything, including the memories he had tried to bury. He gently ran his hand over the keys, each note ringing lonely in the space. When he was a child, his mother used to sit here every Saturday afternoon, playing slow ballads while he sat at her feet, drawing dreams in colored pencil. Back then, the world had no cold deals, no fear of being hurt if you dared to love. His phone buzzed. It was Philip, his manager, and the only friend left since his father passed away. "Did you tell her the truth?" Philip asked bluntly. Ethan looked down at his hands, then out the window. Outside, a few bicycles rolled past the tree-lined park. Part of him wanted to run away. Another part, softer, more afraid, wanted Layla to turn back before he had to make a choice. "No," Ethan replied. "Not yet." "You're running out of time," Philip warned. "You think you're protecting her, but only delaying the hurt." Ethan said nothing, because he knew Philip was right. He was hiding something from Layla, something he couldn't say on a gentle afternoon or in a warm embrace, something that could tear apart the fragile connection between them. That night, Layla sat on the small balcony, looking at the endless line of cars below. Isabel had left. The apartment returned to silence. She pulled out a small box from the drawer, where she kept unsent letters written to her father, her mother, and now to Ethan. She wrote, "You came into my life not like a storm, but like a question I wasn't ready to answer. I don't know what this is between us, or if it's real outside this contract, this convenience. But every time I think of walking away, I remember how you looked at me that night, as if you saw all of me and didn't flinch. That scares me more than anything." She sat there for a long time, neither sending the letter nor tearing it up, because sometimes what keeps us held is the words left unsaid. And what hurts us is not that people go, but that we believed they would stay. The quiet of Ethan's apartment was almost too perfect. Soft jazz hummed from the speakers, the light from the floor-to-ceiling windows casting long shadows across the minimalist space. Everything around him spoke of order, curated, intentional, untouched. But nothing about tonight felt calm. Layla's heels clicked softly against the hardwood as she walked through the living room, her eyes drifting across the expanse of books and stark modern art. It wasn't the luxury that struck her. It was the silence, a silence that somehow echoed the void she often carried in herself. She glanced over her shoulder. Ethan was still standing by the door, one hand raking through his hair, the other fidgeting with his watch strap. She turned back toward him. "You always live like this?" she asked lightly, but her voice lacked its usual lilt. Ethan's smile was faint. "It's functional." She raised a brow. "It's sterile." He chuckled, stepping further in. "I spend more time in boardrooms and on planes than I do here. The idea of home still feels abstract." Layla sat on the edge of the cream-colored sofa. "Maybe you've never had a reason to make it feel real." Their eyes met for a moment too long. Then he looked away. There was something about the air between them that night. Uneasy, but charged. Something had been shifting since the announcement of their strategic marriage at the firm. The performance had been easier at work, with an audience. Here, in this space where there was no script, where there was only them, the lines between pretending and feeling blurred. Ethan poured 2 glasses of wine and handed one to her. Their fingers brushed quickly, but enough to pause the moment. "I looked into your nonprofit," he said quietly as he sat across from her. "The literacy program in the South Side. You've built it from nothing." Layla hesitated. It was never about building. It was about making sure no girl grows up feeling invisible, like her words don't matter. Something shifted in Ethan's gaze. He saw it then, not just her beauty or stubbornness, but the weight she carried behind her grace. "You're not what I expected," he said. "And what did you expect?" she asked, tilting her head slightly. He paused. "Someone transactional. Someone who wanted the name and the power." Layla let out a breath, not quite a laugh. "That's what I thought of you too." The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was thoughtful, heavy with truths neither of them had said aloud. Ethan's jaw tightened slightly as he leaned forward. "Layla, when I first agreed to this marriage, I thought I was buying time, control. But I may have underestimated what I was stepping into." Layla studied him carefully. "Are you afraid that I'll complicate your perfect little structure?" His answer was almost a whisper. "I'm afraid you'll undo it entirely." For a moment, neither of them spoke, and then she looked down at her wine glass, swirling the dark red liquid. "There's something you should know," she said, her voice softer now, more careful. "About why I agreed to marry you." He straightened subtly, alert. "Go on." She met his eyes. The night your firm made the offer, my mother's medical trial was pulled. I needed a solution. Fast. And your offer came with strings I didn't want to touch, but didn't have the privilege to avoid. Ethan's brows furrowed. You never mentioned that. I didn't want pity, she said. I still don't. He leaned back slowly, processing. Something in his expression shifted, no longer seeing her as just a puzzle piece in a business plan, but a woman who had made a sacrifice far deeper than his. I'd like to meet her, he said gently. Layla blinked, caught off guard. Why? Because she raised a daughter who walks through storms without flinching. That's worth knowing. Emotion crept into her eyes before she could hide it. You don't have to do this. Ethan stood and walked toward the window, his silhouette backlit by the city's glow. Maybe I don't, but maybe I want to. Outside, Chicago stretched endlessly, steel and glass and history. Inside, the emotional distance between them had narrowed without permission, and neither knew what to do with the nearness. As the night wore on, Ethan returned to the sofa, sitting beside her. Not across, not apart. They spoke of music and books and childhood regrets, of ambition and loss, of the difference between surviving and living. It was the first night they shared nothing and everything. The wine remained unfinished. The distance between them was too fragile, shrinking, waiting for one to lean in first. But for tonight, it was enough. Let the unraveling begin. Chicago, a winter morning, snow falling thin like breath, silently covering the words left unsaid. Layla sat inside the rented SUV, her hands clasped on her lap, eyes fixed on the glass skyscraper ahead. On the 28th floor, Ethan was meeting with shareholders. He belonged to a world where numbers, not feelings, measured every decision. And she, the so-called paper wife, stood outside that door, just as the original agreement stated. She hadn't planned to come. But the night before, Ethan sent a brief message without greeting or closing. Just one line. If you're free, tomorrow morning, I need you to come with me. No reason, no explanation. Yet she came. When Layla entered the lobby, her presence made a few pairs of eyes pause briefly. She wore a long camel coat, her curly hair tied back, calm but untouchable. The receptionist recognized her immediately and politely led her to the waiting room on the 28th floor. The meeting room remained closed. Voices echoed, mixed with typing and the rustling of documents. Layla sat alone, 2 untouched espressos in front of her. Her hand absent-mindedly touched the thin silver bracelet on her wrist, the gift Ethan gave her after the press conference announcing their marriage. He had said, "Wear it so they remember who you are." The door opened. A stream of people came out, voices mingling with forced smiles, and exchanged papers. Ethan came last, his white shirt slightly wrinkled, tie loosened. When he saw her, he paused momentarily, long enough for their eyes to meet. No smiles, no nods. Just a silence sliding between the crowd, as if they stood on the edge of 2 worlds. He motioned for her to follow without saying a word. In the car, Ethan leaned back in his seat, eyes closed, voice hoarse after the meeting. "Thanks for coming." Layla was silent. She looked at him through the rearview mirror, the dim streetlights flickering across his face like gentle sweeps of memory. No one spoke for the next 10 minutes. Finally, he spoke. "They're starting to doubt about this marriage." Layla tilted her head, expression calm. "Why call me here?" "Because they need to see that we're real, and I don't want anyone else playing your part." That sentence was not just a justification for her presence. It held something more profound, a truth Ethan wasn't ready to explain, and Layla wasn't prepared to ask. The car turned onto a small street where an Italian restaurant favored by investors awaited. Not a romantic dinner. This was a performance, where she was the wife, and he was the husband skillfully showing love. Inside, the candlelight was warm and soft, and piano music played gently. Ethan pulled out her chair, a simple but unfamiliar gesture. He spoke to the guests confidently, skillfully mentioning Layla with phrases like, "She always has better instincts than I do," or "Layla helped me see things." She smiled at the right moments, nodded at the right points, occasionally dropping a light joke that made the table laugh. But in her eyes, something quieter spoke. Distance. When the party ended, he strolled down the empty hallway beside her. The wind blew through the glass panes, cold but pleasant. Ethan stopped by the window, looking at Lake Michigan freezing in patches. "I used to think everything could be controlled, as long as you were logical," he said, voice not quite directed at her. Layla didn't answer. She stepped closer, a half arm's length away. "The problem is, not everything is data to analyze. Some things can only be felt." He tilted his head toward her, and for the first time, his eyes held something gentler than his usual fatigue. "You think we're playing the roles well?" Layla smiled, light as a breath. "That's not the question you should be asking me." A long silence stretched between them. Not heavy, but like a thin layer of snow settling on a coat, then melting away. And in that silence, for the first time, no one mentioned the contract. No one spoke of deadlines. There were only two people, standing amid a city used to pretending. Yet strangely, they no longer wanted to pretend. "Let me know if you'd like anything else." The rain had finally stopped. Outside the window, a sheen of silver clung to the cobblestones of the Montlake neighborhood, painting the quiet Seattle afternoon with a soft luminescence. The city had curled inward, peaceful and muted, as if giving them a rare moment of stillness in the eye of their emotional storm. Layla sat on the wide windowsill in Ethan's brownstone, a mug of chamomile tea in her hands. She had changed into one of his flannel shirts. It draped over her like a memory, and her legs were curled beneath her like she was trying to make herself smaller than the ache she carried. Ethan moved around the kitchen, not speaking much, but every clink of porcelain or slow exhale said enough. His movements were gentle and deliberate. He didn't hover. He didn't question. He let the silence stretch between them, not as a void, but as a space to breathe. "I didn't think you'd let me stay," she said quietly, breaking the hush with words she hadn't even meant to speak aloud. He paused by the stove, then looked over at her. "You're not here because I'm being kind. You're here because this place has always had room for you, even when we both pretended it didn't." His voice wasn't sharp. It wasn't even sad, just steady, like he'd made peace with a truth that had taken him years to admit. Layla turned her face slightly, eyes lingering on the raindrops clinging to the glass. "You think I belong here? I think you've always belonged somewhere safe, and if I'm being honest, this is the first time this house has felt like that in a long time." She didn't answer, but the way she gripped the mug a little tighter betrayed the flicker of something inside her. Later, as Ethan handed her a bowl of lentil soup, her favorite, though he pretended it was just a coincidence, she took it with both hands and studied him over the steam. "You cooked this?" "I have a cookbook now," he said, almost sheepish. "It's color-coded. There are tabs." A small smile pulled at her lips. The Ethan I knew didn't cook. The Ethan you knew was trying so hard to control everything, he forgot how to live. She didn't respond right away, and he didn't push. That night, the warmth of the soup lingered long after the bowls were empty. They talked about inconsequential things. The neighbor's cat sneaking into Ethan's garage, a jazz bar downtown that Layla used to love, the new community center she helped design in South Seattle. Their conversation moved like a river, slow, winding, occasionally catching on an old rock from the past, but flowing gently forward. But beneath it all, there was a quiet hum of awareness, something unspoken but constant. Before bed, Ethan stood in the guest room doorway, her old studio room from when they were first married in name but not in spirit. Let me know if the heater's too loud. It rattles sometimes. Layla looked around the room. He hadn't changed a thing. The framed print of Billie Holiday is still hanging over the desk. Some of her books, at least, still filled the low shelf near the bed. A folded blanket, soft and familiar, rested neatly at the foot. "Thank you," she said. "Not just for the room, and not just for the night." He nodded, hand resting on the doorknob, but didn't leave yet. "Layla," he said softly, "I don't know what comes next for us. I won't pretend I do, but I want you to know, whatever choice you make, I'll respect it. I'll respect you." And that, somehow, undid her more than any declaration of love could have, because it meant he saw her, not as a responsibility, not a mistake to correct, but as someone with agency, deserving of freedom and grace. When he left the room, she stood there for a long time, her fingers grazing the edge of the desk, the old texture of paper and wood beneath them. The quiet was deep, but not lonely. She didn't cry, but she didn't sleep easily either, because peace, after war, always comes slowly. The first snow came early that year. It floated down in delicate flurries, coating the rooftops of Harlem in a muted white, brushing the world with silence. From the tall windows of Naomi's apartment, the city looked still, too still for a woman whose mind had not stopped running in days. She sat on the windowsill with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders and a lukewarm mug of tea in her hands. Her fingers, though warmed by the ceramic, trembled slightly. Not from cold, but from the weight of words she hadn't dared to say. Ethan hadn't come by since the fundraiser, not even a message. And maybe that was for the best. She had repeatedly told herself that this marriage was supposed to be practical, transactional, that her heart had no business aching for a man who, despite his gestures, had kept so much of himself hidden. But even logic couldn't always dull the ache of quiet longing, no matter how sharp. Her phone buzzed softly beside her. Not Ethan. It was Luna's school. Naomi frowned, quickly swiping to answer. "Miss Jameson?" Luna was a bit upset today. Her heart lurched. "Is she hurt?" No, nothing physical." And she refused to speak during group reading and later asked to sit alone during lunch. When we asked what was wrong, she said, "Mommy and Daddy stopped smiling." Naomi closed her eyes, her throat tightening. "I'll pick her up early." Ethan sat alone in the boardroom, but his mind was far from quarterly reports. For the past week, he had buried himself in work, as if spreadsheets and market forecasts could substitute for the image of Naomi turning away from him in the gallery. He could still hear her voice, soft but distant. "You only say the right things when you're trying not to feel them." And maybe she was right. For all his calculated gestures and carefully measured kindness, he had failed the one thing that mattered: honesty. Not about money, not about status, but about who he was, what he felt. When his assistant poked her head in to remind him of the donor brunch, he waved it off. Instead, he called his driver. "I need to go to 145th and Frederick Douglass. Now." Naomi didn't expect him to show up. Not in the middle of a quiet Thursday, when the wind bit through coats and everything felt gray. She opened the door with Luna clinging to her leg, clutching a drawing, a simple sketch of 3 figures holding hands under a sky filled with hearts. Naomi didn't ask who the 3rd figure was, but she knew when she opened the door and found Ethan standing there, snow melting in his dark hair. "Hey," he said, voice soft. I heard Luna had a hard day." Naomi looked down at her daughter, who peeked from behind her. Luna blinked up at Ethan, eyes wide. "You came," she whispered. Ethan crouched, not bothering to brush the snow off his coat. "Of course I did." Silence stretched between them for a moment. Then Luna held out her drawing. "You forgot your copy." He took it like it was made of glass, something precious, and smiled. "I'll frame it," he said. Naomi's lips quirked, then stilled. "Do you want to come in?" He hesitated. "Only if it's okay." She didn't answer with words, just stepped aside. Inside, the apartment was warm, lit with soft lamplight. Although unfamiliar with this space, Ethan's presence didn't feel intrusive. Luna ran to her room, calling out something about finding the right crayons. And then they were alone. Naomi wrapped her arms around herself. "You didn't have to come." "I know." "Then why?" He looked at her, and something unguarded flickered across his face. "Because you're the first person who ever made me want to stop running." Naomi's breath caught. "I wasn't lying when I said I wanted to protect you and Luna," he continued. "But I also wasn't telling you everything. I've spent so long hiding behind what I've built. Money, reputation, logic. It's how I survived. But it's also how I lost things." His voice faltered. "I don't want to lose you too." Naomi looked at him for a long moment. "It's not just about words, Ethan. It's about showing up and staying." "I'm trying," he said, "even if I stumble." She exhaled slowly. The lines in her face softened. Then, gently, she took the drawing from his hands and pinned it to the fridge with a magnet shaped like a sunflower. "We'll see," she said. And she smiled for the first time in weeks, not out of politeness or caution, but something more profound, tentative, real. Outside, the snow kept falling, but inside, something fragile and hopeful had begun to bloom. The rain had long ceased, but the air still carried the hush of something unfinished. Outside Ethan's penthouse window, Chicago glowed in pale orange. Lights blurred behind misty glass panes. Inside, the silence stretched like a tight string. Neither spoke. The remnants of their earlier conversation still hung heavy in the air, like dust swirling in an attic long undisturbed. Layla sat curled into the arm of the velvet armchair, her arms wrapped around her knees, eyes turned toward the city, but unfocused. Lost in some memory Ethan couldn't reach. He stood a few feet away, his fingers drumming absently on the edge of the marble counter, as if unsure whether to close the distance or preserve it. "You're angry with me," he said, his voice low but not accusatory. There was no defense in his tone, no edge, only quiet honesty. Layla didn't respond immediately. Her thumb traced slow, thoughtful circles on her wrist. "Not angry," she murmured. "Just tired of pretending we're okay when we're not." He stepped closer, each movement careful, as though afraid he might startle her. "Then, let's stop pretending." She looked up at that. Her eyes weren't cold, not even guarded, but weighed down by too many truths that had gone unspoken. "You say that like it's easy. But nothing about this has ever been easy, Ethan. Not the marriage, not the silence, and especially not you." He flinched slightly at that last part, not from hurt, but recognition. "I know I've been distant. I know you've had to live in the shadow of everything I didn't say." A breath passed between them. She waited. He didn't look away this time. "After my father died," he said, voice catching, "I promised myself I wouldn't let anyone see the weak parts of me. Not the pain, not the fear, not the loneliness. I thought if I kept everything under control, emotions, attachments, relationships, I wouldn't lose anything else." Layla blinked slowly. Something softened at the edges of her expression, though her voice remained even. "And yet here we are, Ethan. You built a fortress and invited me in, only to keep me behind glass walls." "I know." His voice barely rose above a whisper. "But I didn't realize I'd locked myself in with you." She watched him closely, trying to read the truth in his posture and voice. He'd always had a way of saying the right things when pressed, but this felt different. Not rehearsed, not manipulative, just bare. "When I left for New York," she said quietly, "I didn't go just for the gallery. I went to see who I was without you, whether I could still breathe without waiting for your approval. And I could. But I missed you anyway." Ethan's throat tightened. "I missed you too. Every minute." Layla rose from the chair, her bare feet silent against the hardwood floor. She didn't walk toward him, not yet. Instead, she stood still, looking at him with a steadiness that unsettled and moved him at once. "I need to know," she said, "that if I stay, you won't keep shutting me out. That you won't run back into yourself the second something hurts." He nodded, slowly. "I can't promise I'll be perfect, Layla. But I can promise I'll be present. I'll be real. I'm done hiding." The stillness between them shifted. Not broken, but transformed. It wasn't a resolution yet, but the faint glow of it. She took a step toward him, then another. He didn't reach for her. He waited. And then, without a word, she placed her hand gently against his chest, over the steady thrum of his heart. He covered it with his own, their fingers fitting together with a familiarity that hadn't dulled, not even in distance. They stood like that for a long moment, neither rushing the silence, nor demanding what came next. It was the first time in a long time they weren't speaking past each other, but standing in the same quiet space, together. And that, more than any apology or grand gesture, was where their healing began. The late September wind carried a quiet chill that whispered across the windowsill of the townhouse in Capitol Hill. The light in the kitchen was warm but subdued, casting amber shadows across the tiled floor. Layla stood at the counter, sleeves rolled up, stirring a soup pot as if the steady, circular motion might ground her thoughts. She hadn't heard from Ethan all day. Not a call, not a message. He used to send her not even a forwarded article when he thought of something she'd like. An old jazz vinyl review, a rare orchid auction in Georgetown, a photograph of a street corner that looked like the one in Montmartre they'd once wandered through. Silence now took the shape of absence. Behind her, Luna sat at the table with a book open, but her gaze kept flickering to the front door, as though expecting a miracle. Isabel had stayed quiet most of the afternoon, offering only the occasional squeeze of Layla's hand. The air in the house was a hush before thunder. Ethan was with Charlotte. And Layla. Layla was trying not to imagine that too clearly. The ladle clinked against the side of the pot. She paused, gripping its handle more tightly than necessary. The scent of thyme and roasted carrots rose, comfort food. But she felt anything but comforted. The doorbell rang. Her breath caught mid-chest. Luna looked up, her eyes wide. Isabel was already on her feet, crossing the living room with a calmness Layla couldn't mirror. When the door opened, it wasn't Ethan. It was Charlotte. She stood there with a strange softness to her expression, half embarrassment, half pity. Layla wiped her hands and approached slowly, unsure of what storm was gathering outside. "Hey," Charlotte said, voice low, hesitant. "Can we talk?" Layla didn't answer. She stepped aside. The two women faced each other in the quiet of the living room. Charlotte looked at the family photo still pinned to the fridge. Layla, Ethan, and Luna, standing in a field of sunflowers. All three smiling. The sun behind them, as if the day had been made just for that picture. "I didn't come to start anything," Charlotte said finally. "I just thought you should know." Layla's heart thudded. "He left," Charlotte said. "He didn't stay." Layla frowned. "What are you talking about?" Charlotte stepped forward, her hands twisting slightly in front of her. "He didn't come back for me. I thought maybe he would. Maybe we had some unfinished, whatever it was. But after last night, he walked away." Layla blinked, absorbing the words like puzzle pieces that still didn't form a whole picture. "I asked him," Charlotte continued, "if he was happy, if he ever regretted choosing this life with you. And he looked at me like I didn't understand anything." Layla's breath slowed. "He said he made his choice years ago," Charlotte whispered, "and he's still living it, because he meant it." There was a long pause. Outside, a car passed by, its headlights sweeping across the wall like a silent witness. "I'm not here to play saint," Charlotte added, her voice tight. "I still think he was wrong to shut me out like he did. But I also see now. He never really left you, not even when I wanted him to." Layla swallowed hard. Charlotte's gaze flickered to the kitchen, where Luna pretended not to listen. "She looks like him," Charlotte said softly, "but she's got your eyes. Steady, unforgiving." Layla smiled faintly, more ache than warmth. Charlotte exhaled. "Anyway, that's all. I just thought you deserved to hear it from someone who tried to take him, and couldn't." With that, she left. Layla didn't move for a moment. The door clicked shut behind Charlotte, like the end of a long, complicated sentence. Then footsteps echoed on the porch. The knock this time was quieter, slower. She opened the door. Ethan. His tie was askew, and his expression unguarded in a way she rarely saw. The city lights behind him glowed like a different world, but here he was, in hers. "I didn't know if I should come," he said. "Why did you?" she asked, though her voice barely rose above a whisper. He looked at her like the answer was carved into her face. "Because this is home." He stepped inside, and something shifted quietly, without fanfare. The kind of shift you only notice in retrospect. The kind that changes everything. The first snowfall came quietly, like a secret the city didn't want to share. Flakes drifted down in slow spirals, brushing against rooftops and street lamps, softening even the edges of steel and stone. Through the tall windows of Ethan's penthouse, the world looked like a silent painting. Quiet, suspended, untouched. Layla stood by the glass, her arms wrapped around herself, watching the snow with a stillness mirrored in the sky. Behind her, the living room was bathed in a warm amber glow. Ethan had lit the fireplace earlier without saying a word, and now the flicker of flames danced on her skin like a whisper of something unsaid. Ethan didn't speak at first. He stood in the doorway, watching her silhouette against the wintry world. She wore one of his sweaters again, the sleeves falling past her hands. He didn't know if she wore it to tease him or to comfort herself. Either way, it made his chest ache in a way that he didn't have a name for. "You're quiet tonight," he said eventually, his voice low, careful. Layla turned slightly, her expression unreadable. Some silences feel heavier than words. He took a few steps forward, close enough to smell her faint vanilla perfume. Is this about earlier? She didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked back out at the snow, eyes narrowing slightly, as if trying to decipher something in the way the world kept falling. This place feels too clean, she said finally, too curated. Nothing bad has ever happened here. Or maybe everything bad has been buried beneath layers of beautiful things. Ethan's jaw tensed. He moved to stand beside her, hands in his pockets. I bought this place after the accident, after my father's death. I didn't want anything familiar. I wanted silence. Layla tilted her head, studying him. Did it help? No, he admitted, but it made forgetting easier. She looked down. I don't think I want to forget. Even the pain. It keeps me tethered to the truth. It reminds me that what I lost mattered. Something about how she said it, quiet but fierce, made Ethan's chest tighten. He had tried so long to stay removed, untouched by grief or guilt. And yet, here she was, with her bare vulnerability and stubborn honesty, refusing to let memory be erased. You asked me once, she said suddenly, turning to face him. Why I stayed. He held her gaze. Yes. Layla exhaled. It wasn't the contract, or the comfort, or even how you look at me when you think I'm not watching. A small, rueful smile touched her lips. I stayed because you never lied to me, not even when you should have. Ethan looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. And now? She hesitated, then stepped closer. Now I stay, because I don't want to pretend anymore. Not about the past, not about what I feel, and not about you. There was a pause, long enough to hear the wind brushing against the window pane. Ethan didn't move. His hands remained in his pockets, his posture careful, restrained. What do you feel, Layla? He asked finally. She looked up at him, and for a moment, her expression shifted, like the last defense had fallen. I'm afraid, she whispered, afraid that this, us, might be real. And if it is, I don't know how to protect it. Ethan reached out then, not with the urgency of desire, but with the quiet reverence of someone touching something fragile. He cupped her cheek, his thumb brushing her skin. You don't have to protect it alone. Layla leaned into his touch, closing her eyes. The fire crackled behind them, but the silence between their breaths held the weight of something beginning, something tender, tentative, but real. I'm not good at soft things, he said after a moment, but I'm trying. Layla opened her eyes. So am I. For a while, they stood like that, in the middle of a life neither of them had planned. Two people shaped by loss and silence, trying to find a language that didn't require perfection, only presence. Outside, the snow continued to fall, quietly remaking the city. Inside, a warmth had begun to settle, not just from the fire, but from the quiet miracle of being seen and not turning away. The storm had passed, but the silence it left behind lingered like mist over the city. Ethan sat on the edge of the piano bench in his living room, fingers grazing the ivory keys, though no sound emerged. The memory of Layla's voice from the night before, broken, trembling, honest, echoed in the hollows of his chest. Her confession about the baby, her fear, her strength, rewrote everything he thought he understood. He hadn't slept. He'd wandered between rooms like a man displaced in his own life, until dawn spilled through the windows and made the silence even louder. Layla wasn't just a part of his past. She was still rooted in him, in ways he hadn't dared to admit. Not when he thought she'd moved on, or believed she had chosen distance over them. But now? Now he understood the magnitude of her solitude, the way she had carried everything: grief, pride, motherhood, alone. And she had done it to protect him. In the early afternoon, he found himself in his car, heading toward the community center where Luna's birthday party was meant to take place. He wasn't sure if he was invited. He wasn't sure if he had any right to be there. But when he stepped out of the car, children's laughter pulled him forward like a thread. Inside, the gymnasium was warm with celebration. Pink and silver streamers dangled from the ceiling, balloons bounced gently in the corners, and Luna was dancing in the middle of a ring of friends, her hair bouncing with every spin. Her joy was unfiltered, wide-eyed, and honest. Layla was across the room, standing near the cake table, whispering with one of the other parents. Her expression was calm, even soft, but her shoulders were too straight. She hadn't seen him yet. Ethan didn't move toward her immediately. Instead, he watched Luna for a long moment, absorbing her. How she moved, how she laughed, how familiar the shape of her smile was. A lump caught in his throat. For 5 years, he had missed every birthday, every first word, every scraped knee, and goodnight story. When Luna noticed him, she stopped mid-spin, blinking as if trying to place him in a memory. Then, slowly, she walked toward him. "You came," she said. "I did," Ethan replied, kneeling so they were eye to eye. Her brow furrowed. "Are you my real dad?" The question landed like a quiet wave breaking against the shore. Ethan looked into her face and saw the shadow of his mother at the tilt of her chin. "I am," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "If it's okay with you." She didn't answer right away. Instead, she touched his sleeve, then took his hand. It was small, warm, and full of questions. Layla's footsteps were soft behind him. "Luna," she said gently, "why don't you check on the cupcakes?" Luna nodded and let go of Ethan's hand. As she skipped away, Layla stood there, uncertain, her eyes holding both apology and resilience. "I wasn't sure you'd come," she said. "I wasn't sure I should," Ethan admitted. "But I had to see her. I had to see you." They stood in silence, the noise of the party muted by the space that still lingered between them. But there was something softer in it now, something that felt less like absence and more like possibility. "I didn't tell you because I thought I was protecting you," Layla said, her voice low. "You were in the middle of something impossible, and I didn't want to be another burden." "You were never a burden," Ethan replied. "You were the only thing that kept me breathing." Her eyes shimmered, but she blinked the emotion away. "She's incredible," she said. "She's kind, curious, and she sings in the morning just like your mother used to." He smiled faintly. "I don't know where to start, Layla." "Maybe you don't have to start," she said. "Maybe just be here." Ethan reached for her hand, not demanding, not pleading, just a quiet gesture of acknowledgement. Her fingers trembled slightly as they laced with his. "I want to know her," he said. "And I want to understand what it meant for you to raise her alone. I want to earn my place, not take it." "You already have a place," Layla murmured. "You just didn't know it." Outside, the late afternoon sun lit the windows with golden light. Inside, the party continued, children laughing, music playing, frosting smudged on cheeks and napkins. But beneath the simplest touch of fingers entwined at the edge of the celebration, something more fragile and enduring was unfolding. The quiet beginning of forgiveness. The night had deepened into a velvet hush, where the quiet wasn't silence, but the soft breathing of the city just beyond Layla's apartment walls. A low hum from the distant train rumbled faintly, like an old song threading through time. Ethan sat at the edge of her couch, one leg bouncing nervously, the fingers of his left hand grazing the rim of the coffee mug she had placed in front of him, but neither had touched. Layla stood across from him, arms loosely crossed, not in defense, but in restraint. The lamp behind her cast a golden halo over her curls, softening the stern lines of her expression. Her voice was calm when she finally spoke. "You should have told me." There was no accusation in her tone, no bitterness, just truth, drawn out and held like a mirror. "I know." Ethan's voice cracked faintly. He didn't bother to defend himself this time. "I didn't want to ruin what we had." Her lips parted slightly, a breath caught mid-thought. She looked at him for a long moment, measuring whether that fear had ever justified the secrecy. Then she stepped forward, just one pace, but the room shifted with it. "You were scared of ruining it by telling the truth," she said quietly. "But did you think about what the lie would do to it?" Ethan didn't look away. His eyes, pale and too open, held hers like someone clinging to the last solid thing in a flood. "I thought I could keep the past separate, that it wouldn't reach you." "But I'm not separate from your past anymore," Layla whispered. "I'm part of it now." That realization seemed to land between them like snowfall, quiet, soft, irreversible. The words she'd found earlier that day, folded in the pages of a notebook she had forgotten she even gave him, now felt heavier, not because of what they said, but because they had come too late. Ethan had written them months ago, pages of observations, thoughts, and moments he hadn't voiced aloud. Apologies tucked between musings, longing dressed up in silence, love in all its fragile honesty. "You never gave those to me," she said. "You kept everything on paper." "I didn't know how to say them to your face," Ethan admitted. "I wasn't sure I had the right." Layla's shoulders sank slightly. "Ethan, you can't just curate which parts of yourself I get to see. If we're building something real, it has to be with all of it." The room went still. Ethan looked at her then, not with regret, but the ache of someone who had come to understand the cost of absence. "I never meant to keep things from you. I didn't want my pain to become yours." Layla walked toward him slowly, her bare feet whispering across the hardwood floor. She didn't sit. Instead, she knelt gently before him, her hands resting on his knees. The intimacy of the gesture stole the air between them. "It already has," she said. "But maybe that's not the worst thing." He looked down at her, the woman who had entered his life not as a cure, but as clarity. She had never asked him to be anyone else. She had only asked for the truth. "I don't want to lose you," Ethan said, and the words came out bare, childlike. Layla's hands slid up to clasp his. Her voice was quieter now, but firm. "Then stop hiding. Stop assuming I can't handle your darkness. Let me meet it." A beat of silence. Then he nodded, just once. Later that night, they sat side by side on the couch, the distance between them quietly folding into nothing. She leaned against him, her head finding the hollow of his shoulder, and he felt it. That rare, almost sacred weight of trust settling in. Outside, the wind stirred the branches like breath against skin. Inside, neither of them spoke, because some truths didn't need repeating. They only needed to be held. It had been 3 days since the snowfall blanketed the city in silence, and Ethan hadn't called. Not a message, not a note, not even the echo of a late-night voicemail. Layla stood by the window of her apartment, forehead gently pressed against the cold glass, watching the afternoon light slip behind the outline of downtown. The world outside looked as still as she felt, motionless, suspended in a moment that wouldn't end. She had rehearsed it over and over in her mind, the conversation they would have, the way she would look at him, not angry, not bitter, just tired of carrying a heart that couldn't seem to decide whether to hope or to heal. But the conversation never came. What came instead was a soft knock at her door just past dusk. She opened it slowly, and there he was. Ethan, hair slightly disheveled from the wind, coat damp at the shoulders, and eyes, those impossibly blue eyes, worn out in a way she hadn't seen before. There was something quieter in him now, stripped bare of arrogance and precision. He didn't speak at first. He looked at her as if every word he'd tried to write in the past 3 days had failed him. "I've been trying to find the right way to say this," he murmured, his voice low, husky with weariness. "But there isn't one." Layla didn't move. Her arms stayed at her sides, but her heart pressed up hard against her ribs, aching to understand. "I panicked," he admitted. "After what happened with Isabel. After Luna told me. After I saw you walk away from that hotel lobby like you were used to leaving before being asked to stay. I realized I had no idea how to hold something that matters." His hand curled slightly, like he was reaching for something invisible between them. "I've spent so long hiding behind control, behind boardrooms and negotiations and non-disclosure agreements, that I forgot how to speak when something touches me." Her voice was soft, almost fragile. "So what are you saying now?" "I'm saying I didn't expect you, Layla," he said, eyes glinting as they caught hers. "And I sure as hell didn't expect to fall in love with you." The words hung in the quiet like breath on glass. For a second, neither of them dared to move. Then she closed the door a little more, halfway. "Is that why you disappeared?" she asked, not accusing, unraveling the knots individually. "Because you didn't know how to love out loud?" He exhaled, a bitter smile curling at the edge of his lips. "Because I didn't know if I deserved to." The silence between them wasn't hostile. It was hesitant, tender, like two people standing in a field of broken porcelain, afraid of taking a step. "You hurt me," she whispered. "I know," he said, "but I don't want to keep hurting you. I don't want to be the man who shows up only when it's too late." Layla looked at him for a long time. She remembered the way he made coffee too strong in the mornings, the way he always checked the locks twice, the way he read bedtime stories to Luna in voices so serious that it made her laugh. She remembered the feel of his palm pressed to her spine the night she had cried in his arms without saying a word, and she remembered the sound of silence when he disappeared. She stepped back just slightly, and for a moment, Ethan looked like he might crumble. But then she reached for the doorframe and leaned against it quietly. "This can't be another beginning," she said gently. "Not unless it's real. Not unless you stay through the quiet, the hard days, all the things you'd rather avoid." "I'm not going anywhere," he replied. There was no grand gesture, no cinematic kiss, no perfectly lit epiphany under a snowfall. Just two people finally saying the things they had once swallowed. Layla opened the door wider. Not thoroughly, just enough. And Ethan stepped inside. Not like a man returning to something he owned, but like a man entering something sacred. He didn't try to hold her right away. He didn't rush to prove anything. Instead, he sat on the edge of the couch like he had the first night they talked in her apartment, years ago, when everything was uncertain but strangely honest. She sat beside him, and for the first time in what felt like months, the silence felt warm. There was still so much left unsaid, apologies that would have to come, boundaries to be drawn, trust to rebuild. But for now, Ethan leaned slightly, shoulder brushing hers, and whispered the only truth that mattered. "You make everything quieter inside me." Layla closed her eyes. Maybe this was love. Not loud, not flawless, just real enough to return to. The first rays of dawn slipped softly through the half-closed curtains, painting the room in gentle golds and blush pinks. Layla lay curled beside Ethan, their fingers intertwined like the quiet poetry of a love rediscovered, fragile yet unwavering. The night had been a delicate unraveling of walls built too high, the silences between them replaced by whispered truths and tender confessions. Ethan's steady breath mingled with hers, a rhythm that felt both foreign and profoundly familiar. They existed in that moment for a long time, a sanctuary from the chaos that once threatened to pull them apart. Ethan's voice broke the silence, hushed but certain. I want to build something real with you, Layla. Not just a love that exists in flashes or fits, but a life that holds us both, steady and kind, even when it's hard. She smiled against his chest, feeling the truth in his words settle like a warm flame inside her. I've long waited for that kind of love, she whispered, and I'm ready to stop running from it. Outside, the city stirred awake, but inside the quiet apartment on the edge of Seattle, time felt suspended, a tender promise cradled in the space between two hearts. They had been through storms of doubt and silence, battles of pride and fear, but what remained was undeniable, a connection forged in passion, trust, and vulnerability. As Ethan gently brushed a stray curl from her face, Layla's eyes glistened with unshed tears, not of sadness but of a hope reborn. I don't want perfect, Ethan murmured. I want us, flaws and all. She laughed softly, a sound like sunlight through leaves. Flawed and fearless. Their lips met in a kiss, less about urgency and more about the steady, unspoken vow to stand by each other through every season, whatever may come. The days ahead would not be without challenges, but together, they had found the strength to face whatever shadows lingered. And in that, Layla and Ethan discovered the rarest kind of love, one that held the power to heal, grow, and endure. If Layla and Ethan's journey has moved you, don't forget to like, share your thoughts in the comments, and follow for more stories that touch the heart and soul. Your support means the world and keeps these stories alive. Thank you for being part of this journey.